in a few minutes as well. So yeah, welcome to this evening's talk by Continuous Discovery Habits by Teresa Torres. I'm David Rademir. I'm the co-founder of this meetup group that you're part of. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to enable everyone to continuously learn and improve in our roles, partly by sharing with each other, but also by inspirational talkers like Teresa tonight. So that's going to be really awesome. Really looking forward to this. But I'm also deep engineering at the Techtify that are sponsoring with the Zoom setup, which is it's pretty easy now that we're online. The only thing you need is a Zoom account, and that's what the Techtify is helping out with. The Techtify we're trying to automate hacker expertise into your workflows to help you find vulnerabilities. So we have products such as asset monitoring that will help you scan what you host and keep track of all your internet-facing assets and technologies. We also have a deep scan that will help you scan more serious the websites and the APIs that you build. So that's just a quick thing from the Techtify. And with that, I just hand it over to Teresa, and I'm really looking forward to this talk. It's going to be so great.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So welcome everybody to the what and why of continuous discovery. I'm Teresa Torres. I work as a product discovery coach. We'll get into what does that even mean if you're not familiar with that language. I've had the luxury of working with teams all over the world in a wide variety of industries, some as small as a 2-person founding team, all the way up to really large multinational companies with hundreds of thousands of employees. Part of the reason why I like to share that is the framework and the tactics and the tools that we're going to talk through today have been tested in a lot of different contexts and a lot of different environments. I know what it's like to sit in an audience and listen to a talk and think like, oh, this is only going to work for the Facebooks and the Netflix and the Googles of the world. So I always like to just start off with these methods have been tested in a lot of environments, and I want to encourage you to think about how you might bring some of them to your own context, because odds are I've worked with a team like yours. Okay, so with that in place, let's get into what do we mean by discovery. So we often talk about discovery in contrast to delivery. These terms are not new. They're just becoming a lot more trendy as companies start to shift their focus to thinking about how do we get better at discovery. So discovery is simply a term we use to describe the work we're doing to make decisions about what to build. Good discovery includes the customer in that process, right? So how do we infuse our decisions about what to build with customer feedback? And then we often contrast this with delivery, which is the work that we're doing to build, ship, and maintain a production quality product. Now, this distinction is becoming popular for a pretty good reason. A lot of companies historically have put a big emphasis on delivery and often underemphasized discovery. And we find ourselves in this really unfortunate situation where maybe we're building efficiently, but we're building the wrong things. And so more and more companies are starting to look at how do we make better decisions about what to build. The other major trend that's happening right now is a shift from a project mindset to a continuous mindset, right? We see this on the delivery side as companies move towards more continuous deployment strategies. I remember working at a startup where back in the early 2000s, where the idea of a nightly build and automating the release process was this crazy innovative thing. When we're starting to see that's more a norm, that's more a just good engineering standard. We're starting to see the same shift from a project mindset to a continuous mindset happen on the discovery side as well. And that's because if we're going to be continuously delivering our products, if our digital products are always evolving and continuously changing, we need to make sure that we're continuously discovering what's the right thing to be building. And so I want to start with just a really clear definition of continuous discovery, because there's a lot of misunderstanding here. So this definition comes from my book, Continuous Discovery Habits. I define continuous discovery as weekly touch points with customers by the team building the product where they're conducting small research activities in pursuit of a desired product outcome. Now, there's a lot to this definition. We're going to take our time. We're going to go through it line by line because I think each element is pretty critical. So I want to start with this first line, and it's really about the cadence, right? We're going to start by adopting a weekly cadence. So we're continuously engaging with our customers. And I want to talk about why that's important. So as product people, and I want to share that I use this term broadly, a product person is anybody who works on a digital product. So that is a product manager, a designer, a software engineer, a data analyst, anybody who's involved in creating digital products. We're making product decisions every day. Some of them are big strategic decisions, like which customer should we serve, what outcomes should we go after. Others are more mundane decisions, like what do we label this button in the interface? How should the underlying data model work? How do we abstract a concept as we're building, right? These decisions, most of us know that our big decisions need some customer input. Those strategic decisions, like which customer should we serve? What opportunities do we go after? Most of us know to do some research, get some customer input for those bigger decisions. That's usually where we see project research show up in our organizations. We forget that those daily decisions can also benefit from customer feedback. And here's an example. I know we have a lot of engineers in the audience, and I'm sure every single one of you have had the experience where you're trying to implement something and you're constrained by the monolithic code base or by the way the underlying data model was set up, and it just doesn't work for what the customer is trying to do. It's exactly these situations that if we continuously get feedback from our customers, we're not going to get rid of those situations entirely, but we can reduce them. The other reason why it's really critical that we start to adopt this weekly cadence is, as product people, when we work on our products, whether we're engineers, product managers, designers, we become experts on our products, right? We work on them all day, every day. We know where everything lives in the product. We know what functionality is available. We were part of making those decisions. So we can hold it all in our head. We know what's where, we know how it works, we know what this data model supports. The challenge is our customers don't have that same depth of expertise. And there's this cognitive bias called the curse of knowledge. This cognitive bias basically says, once we develop expert knowledge, in this case about our product, we can no longer remember what it was like to not have that expert knowledge. And so what happens is we make these daily decisions, we start making them from our expert point of view, and they stop working for our customers, right? And so there's a really easy way to avoid this, and that's just simply, we want to engage with our customers on a weekly basis. Hold on a second, I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty. What's going on here? I apologize. Okay, so the really easy way around this is to just engage with our customers on a weekly basis. What this does is it helps us start to see the gap between how we think about the product and how our customers think about the product. Most of us were in this industry because we're trying to serve our customers, and really just being aware of the gap is enough to motivate us to work to close that gap. There's another benefit to this weekly cadence, and that's that for a lot of us, we're already doing some discovery, but we're doing it from a validation mindset. So let me explain what that means. On the design side, it means that we do all of the pixel perfect production quality design, and at the end, we do some usability testing to validate, did we get it right? On the engineering side, we write all of the code, we ship it, and we A/B test it in our production environment to validate, did we get it right? There's nothing wrong with validation research. We should be doing both of those activities, but validation research is not the same as discovery, right? Because discovery, we're trying to make better decisions about what to build, and we don't want to get feedback that we built the wrong thing after we're done with all of the work. Ideally, we want to get feedback as we're making the decisions before we've invested all the design time and all the delivery time. So if we engage with customers on a weekly basis, we actually start to develop what I call a co-creation mindset. This is where we're going to get feedback even before we know what problem we're solving. We're going to get feedback when our designs are pencil sketches. We're going to get feedback when we haven't even written product requirements yet, or we haven't written a line of code yet. This is really valuable because before you've done the design, before you've written the code, it's a lot less expensive to make changes, which means we can integrate much more of our customers' feedback. It's much more actionable. Now, whenever I talk about co-creating with customers, someone in the audience is thinking of one of two quotes. The first is a very recent quote from Steve Jobs, where he said, "Customers don't know what they want until we show it to them." The other one comes up a lot in the United States because allegedly Henry Ford said Henry Ford was innovated assembly lines to get more cars out the door, right? And he allegedly said, if I had asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Okay, so let's be really clear here. What Henry Ford and Steve Jobs are getting at is that we can't just go to our customers and say, what should we build? And that's because our customers are not experts on technology. We are, right? So when I talk about co-creating with customers, I'm not talking about just building whatever our customers ask for. The key here is our customers are experts on their own world, their own context, their own needs, their own pain points. We're experts on what's possible with technology. And so when we talk about co-creating, we're talking about synthesizing those two knowledge streams so that we end up with better solutions. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in the latter half of this talk. Okay, so we've talked about this first line, weekly touch points with customers. We're adopting this weekly cadence so that we're getting feedback throughout the process, not just at the end. We're really trying to overcome this curse of knowledge so we're not making decisions from our expert point of view and making decisions that will work for our customers. The key here is who's engaging with customers on a weekly cadence. And that's the second line. It needs to be by the team that's building the product. This is really critical because a lot of companies rely on centralized research teams, whether that's a business intelligence team or a strategy team, to deliver research to the teams that are building the product. The challenge with this is that research is rarely actionable or timely or nuanced enough to support our daily product decisions. So we really want the team that's building the product getting just-in-time answers to their daily and weekly questions. And this starts with this idea of a product trio. So our industry is moving to this model where a product manager, a software engineer, and an engineer and a designer are collaborating from the very beginning about when they're making decisions about what to build. I want to contrast this with what we've historically done. We've historically had the product manager gather or write requirements. They hand them off to the designer who does all the design work. Both the requirements and the design get handed off to engineers, and the engineers then implement. What's wrong with this waterfall model? We see a lot of, with every handoff, we see context lost. We're moving further and further away from the customer. And we also see a lot of rework, right? The product manager writes requirements. They go to the designer runs into design constraints. We have to rewrite requirements. Everything eventually goes to the engineers. They run into technical constraints. We have to rewrite the requirements, redo the design. Here's what we're learning. It's actually more efficient, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but it's more efficient. And we get better solutions if these three roles collaborate from the very beginning. So what we're seeing is more teams adopt this trio model where the team is engaging with customers on a weekly basis together, and they're making collaborative decisions about what to build. Now, most of us have more than 3 people on our team. Depending on your DevOps strategy, you definitely probably have other engineers on your team. And then depending on your DevOps strategy, you might still have QA folks or release managers on your team. Depending on how you interface with the rest of the business, you might work with data analysts or customer success folks, product marketing managers. Maybe you have the luxury of having a user researcher on your team. I could have put 40 roles on this slide. I'm not trying to exclude anybody. The idea here with the trio, here's the key principle. We want the right cross-functional roles in the room based on the type of decision that you're trying to make. However, you don't want to include everybody in every decision because we're trading off speed of decision-making with quality of decision-making. So the fewer people involved in a decision, the faster the decision will be made. However, the more relevant cross-functional roles represented, the better decision that you'll make. So the key is this idea of a trio can flex based on the decisions that you're making. We know from experience that we want these 3 roles in the middle represented at a minimum. But if, for example, you're trying to figure out what analytics to track as you instrument your product, you're probably inviting your data analyst who's managing that part of the product to be part of those decisions. If you're doing discovery on your go-to-market strategy, you probably want your product marketing manager to be a part of those decisions. But you don't need everybody in every decision. So again, this idea can flex based on the type of decision that you're making and the roles that are available to you on the team. Here's the key though, if we go back to our definition, we want the team that's building the product. So this starts with the trio engaging with customers on a weekly basis, because that's the team that's driving discovery decisions. And therefore that's the team that needs to overcome the curse of knowledge. So we've tackled this first half of the definition. The real meat comes in the second half. What does this look like? We're a product trio. We're engaging with customers every week. What are we doing in those customer touch points? Our goal is to conduct small research activities in pursuit of a desired product outcome. And this is really critical. We can't take our old project-based research and try to jam it on a weekly cadence. We're just going to burn ourselves out. So we got to change our research methods. And we're not doing research for research's sake. We're doing research to drive an outcome. So we're going to get into the second half of this definition quite a bit here. There's a visual that I like to use to help teams manage this process. It's called an opportunity solution tree. If you've never seen this, it's a really simple vision. It's basically a decision tree. It's going to help the trio chart the best path to their desired outcome. So this starts with having a clear outcome in mind. Now, I want to contrast, again, as an industry, we're moving from an output focus to an outcome focus. And so I want to start with what is an output focus? If you're working with a fixed roadmap, if your teams are being asked to define a quarterly roadmap or an annual roadmap, and they're just working against a set feature list with deliveries, timelines, that's an output focus. We're starting with what are the outputs we're going to build. The shift to an outcome focus is saying, look, what is the impact of those outputs and what's the impact we need to create? So outcomes are introducing a little bit more uncertainty. We're able to say, we're not sure what outputs we need to build, but we know we need them to have this outcome, this impact. This is really important. In fact, in the 2020 and sadly far into 2021 than we expected, the whole world is getting a giant dose of reality about how much uncertainty and ambiguity there is in the world, right? So if you started 2020 with a fixed roadmap, my guess is by March, it was completely disrupted as people started working from home and a global economy started to slow down. We probably aren't going to face a global pandemic every year of our lives. Let's hope not. But we do see markets get disrupted by new competitors entering the market, by new technology disrupting what's possible. The opportunity space is constantly shifting. Even when we release code, we're having an impact on our customers' behavior and the marketplace. We're changing the impact, we're changing what's happening in the world. And so this shift from an output focus to an outcome focus allows us to be more adaptable, allows us to be more responsive. So let me give an example of what this looks like. I'm going to use Netflix in my examples, not because I've been sponsored by Netflix, not because I've actually never even worked with Netflix. I have no relationship with them whatsoever, but people all over the world are generally familiar with how their product works. So if I'm defining an outcome and I work at Netflix, I'm going to start with your outcome represents business value. So this usually starts with the business model. So if I look at Netflix business model, their subscription business, what are the metrics they care about? They probably care about customer acquisition. They probably care about customer retention, right? So I might start with something like increase retention, increase subscriber retention. That's a clear business outcome that if a product team focused on increasing subscriber retention, they would create value for the business. So we could say, we don't know what outputs we're going to build yet, but we know we're going to focus on increasing subscriber retention so we can guarantee we create value from the business. From there, we want to focus on customer value. So this is where we're going to discover opportunities that can drive our outcome. Now, opportunities just represent customer needs, customer pain points, or customer desires. So it's really just a broad term to represent more than the problem space, but also the desire space, right? So how can we have a positive impact on our customers? How can we create customer value? So we're discovering the opportunities that we believe that if we addressed them would create business value. So this visual is helping us align customer value with business value. And then outputs do matter. We do need to discover the solutions or the outputs that might address those opportunities in a way that will create customer value and that will drive our outcome, therefore creating business value. So this visual is going to help us make sure that our research activities are in pursuit of a desired outcome, our business value, in a way that also creates customer value. So let's dive into how we're going to build out this visual. Like I said, it starts at the top with defining a clear outcome. In an ideal world, if this is a two-way negotiation between your product leaders or your engineering leaders or your design leaders and that product trio. So this is, think about your CTO, your chief product officer, your chief design officer, the executive who has the across the business view of how a product trio can create value for the business, and the product trio. And the reason why this is a two-way negotiation is because executives tend to think in business outcomes, those financial metrics like increased customer acquisition, increased subscriber retention, the things that drive our business model. The product trio needs to translate that to a behavior in the product that they can directly influence, which means they need a theory for how the product is going to drive that business outcome. So here's what this might look like. If we stick with our Netflix example, the product team at Netflix charged with increasing retention might develop a theory that says if you watch Netflix more, you're more likely to keep your subscription. So we're going to focus on increasing viewing engagement. So they're translating the business outcome, increased subscriber retention, to a product outcome, a behavior that's occurring in the product that allows them to impact that business outcome. Once that outcome is in place, the team is going to start their weekly cadence of their first research activity, and that's interviewing customers on a weekly cadence. Now, we're interviewing to discover opportunities, to discover needs, pain points, and desires. We're not interviewing to evaluate solutions. I'm going to introduce a different research activity that will help us do that. So we're interviewing on a weekly cadence to discover the opportunity space. This weekly cadence is particularly critical with interviewing because, again, the marketplace is always shifting. It's always changing. If we interview on a regular basis, we're able to make sure that we always have a current understanding of customer needs, pain points, and desires. Now, the reason why most teams don't do this is it's hard to find somebody to talk to, right? Recruiting is typically our biggest barrier to talking to customers on a regular basis. So I'm going to recommend that you take some time to automate your recruiting process. Now, this is going to sound a little bit magical, but maybe not to engineers in the room, but it definitely sounds magical to product managers and designers. I want you to wake up on Monday morning and have an interview on your calendar already without you having to do anything to put it there. And I'm going to give you the 3 most common strategies for how to get there. The first is you can recruit people while they're using your product or service. So while you have your customer's attention, you can put an interstitial, a pop-up, just embed it somewhere on a page. Basically ask people to participate in an interview while you have their attention while they're using your product or service. You can see on the slide here, this is a hourly job board here in the US. They're asking for 20 minutes of time. They're offering $20 in return. For this particular audience, that's a pretty valuable incentive. They're making a small ask in exchange for a big reward. If they say continue, they're getting a scheduling software link where they can just pick a time on the calendar. It's completely automated. This strategy works extremely well for B2C companies and for recruiting B2B end users. If you're trying to interview B2B buyers, our second strategy is going to help you with that, where what I'm going to encourage you to do is to use your customer-facing teams to help you recruit. Here's what this looks like. You can use your sales teams, your account managers, your support teams. You can define triggers for them each week where you can say, if you talk to a customer who's experiencing this need, pain point, or desire, please ask them to do a 20-minute interview and go ahead and put it on my calendar. So in this instance, you're using your customer-facing teams to recruit for you. These are the people that are already on the phone with your customers all day, every day, and you're just asking them to put an interview on your calendar. This is a very effective way to recruit B2B buyers because that's who tends to be talking to your customer-facing teams. Now, I will share these first 2 strategies are going to work in the vast majority of cases. I have worked with some companies where they have a very specific market that makes recruiting challenging. Now, every single one of you is probably thinking your market is challenging. I can tell you, you probably will have success with one of the first two strategies. I'm going to introduce a third strategy for some very specific instances. The first is if your target customer has very little discretionary time. Now, we all think we have very little discretionary time. I'm talking about Fortune 500 CEOs. I'm talking about respiratory physicians and nurses during the height of COVID, right? Extreme situations where people have very little time, or your total addressable market is teeny tiny and you're worried about tapping the same customers over and over again. Again, I want to give you an example. I worked with a company where their total addressable market was US-based movie studios of a certain size. There were 6 companies in their total addressable market. I worked with another company where their total addressable market was Canadian medical schools. There's maybe a dozen or 2, right? So in these extreme instances, what you can do is set up a customer advisory board. This is where you're engaging in long-term relationships with a smaller number of customers that you can tap over and over again for interviews. You're still engaging them with one-on-one interviews. So if you have 3 product teams, you might invite 12 customers to be part of your customer advisory board. That gives your 3 product teams. Every single team has a different customer to talk to for a month. Rotate teams, keep going. Every 3 months, the same team is going to revisit a customer they've already talked to. Okay, I see in the Q&A that a ton of questions have come in on this. This is the key to unlocking a continuous cadence. So we will definitely get to your questions in the Q&A. Once you have automated your recruiting process, when you have a customer in the room, we need to look at how do we ask the right questions. A lot of people don't interview well because we're not trained as qualitative researchers. I'm going to give you some very simple tips to dramatically improve the reliability of what you're learning in an interview. The number 1 rule is we want to avoid speculation. Humans rarely reflect on our actual behavior. However, thanks to a number of cognitive biases, when asked a direct question, our brains give us a fast answer and we think it reflects reality. It often does not. So here's what this means. If I work at Netflix and I want to learn about your Netflix behavior, I might want to know things like, what do you like to watch? What device do you watch on? Where do you watch? Who do you watch with? How do you decide what to watch? But I don't want to ask you these questions directly. Humans are terrible at answering direct questions out of context. Your answers are not going to be reliable. I'm going to hear about the documentaries you like to watch, and I'm not going to hear about the reality TV that you like to watch, right? I'm going to hear about the most recent or the most salient instance, but I'm not going to hear about the most common instance. There's lots of examples of this in the world. We all think we work out more often than we do. We think we drink less alcohol than we do. We think we eat healthier than we do. We don't want to build products based on people's ideals, speculative selves. We want to build products based on what they actually do. The way to fix this is in your interviews, ask questions that elicit specific stories. So instead of asking my who, what, why, how questions, I'm going to ask to tell me about a time when question. So in the Netflix world, this could be, tell me about the last time you watched Netflix. Tell me about the last time you had to choose a new show to watch. Tell me about the last time you searched for something on Netflix. Tell me about the last time you watched something on the go. So I can play with the type of story I'm collecting, but by collecting a specific story, asking my questions in context, I can get answers to all those who, what, why questions, right? If you tell me about the last time you watched Netflix, I can listen for who were you with, where were you, what device were you on, how did you decide what to watch? But your answers are going to be far more reliable because they're grounded in a specific instance. There's another benefit to story-based interviewing. Customer needs, pain points, and desires, opportunities emerge from customer stories. So as we collect customer stories, we're starting to hear about needs, pain points, and desires, and we're getting them in a context. And that's really critical because products exist in that context. So as we collect customer stories, we want to map out the opportunity space. Mapping out the opportunity space is a critical concept. We don't have a ton of time to cover this today, but the tree structure in particular is going to help you break big, intractable, evergreen opportunities into smaller and smaller, more solvable opportunities. That's going to help unlock this continuous cadence. So you want to do the work to understand, what are we hearing from our interviews? What are the needs, pain points, and desires that we're hearing? How do we structure them in a way that unlocks this continuous cadence? Once we've done that, we're going to choose a teeny tiny opportunity to start with. And I want you to work with a set of solutions that all address the same target opportunity. Now, this is different from what we typically do. When we hear a customer need, we tend to jump to our first solution. And when we do that, we ask this question, is this idea good or not? And as we do all of our discovery activities, as we experiment, as we collect feedback, if we frame it, if we're working with one idea at a time, if we ask this whether or not question, is this idea good or not? This framing exacerbates a couple cognitive biases. First of all, the first is called an escalation to commitment. The more time we invest in an idea, the more we identify with it. The more we identify with it, the more committed we become, the more we fall in love with it. The problem with that is it exacerbates the second bias, which is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias suggests we're only going to notice the evidence that suggests our idea is fantastic, and we're going to miss much of the evidence that suggests our idea is flawed. Now, most of us think we're immune to these cognitive biases. We think, oh, of course, I'm going to pay attention to the negative feedback. Here's the thing. Confirmation bias doesn't say you ignore negative feedback. It says you don't even notice it. Your brain acts as a filter where you're more likely to see the positive evidence and not see the negative evidence. So we don't want to work with one idea at a time. Even if you're doing all the right discovery activities, you're not getting the most benefit from them. The way to fix this is to set up a compare and contrast decision. So instead of saying, is this idea good or not, we're going to say which of these ideas look most promising. This framing tricks your brain into seeing the pros and cons of each of the options. This is a really critical concept that I want to give you a visual to help you remember this. This is Usain Bolt. He was once the world's fastest 100-meter runner. If I asked you, is Usain Bolt fast? I want you to hear a whether or not question. Is he fast or not? I don't know how to answer that question. Fast, like good, is a relative trait. So I want you to ask, is he fast relative to what? Is he fast relative to a cheetah? Probably not. Is he fast relative to a Tesla? In the first 100 meters, I would love to see that race. Is he fast relative to other humans? Absolutely. So what we're seeing in the photo on the right is a compare and contrast decision with a clear front runner. When we evaluate solutions, this is what we're looking for. We're not looking for ambiguous, qualitative, hazy feedback that confirms what we want to believe that our idea is fantastic. We're comparing and contrasting multiple solutions, looking for a clear front runner. Now, the reason why we typically don't do this is because we're doing large-scale project-based research to evaluate our ideas, and we don't have time to do large project-based research for 3 different ideas. So we have to change our research methods. We have to make them smaller. We have to make them more iterative. We have to make them feasible to experiment with 3 ideas at a time. So I'm going to walk through an example to show how this works. I'm going to stick with my Netflix example. I want you to imagine that we interviewed a bunch of Netflix customers and we heard over and over again, Netflix is good at TV shows and movies, but they're not good at live sports. And the need is, I want to watch live sports. Now, we're good product people, so we know we want to work with 3 different solutions for the same target need. So I'm going to walk through 3 potential solutions. I'm not very familiar with the TV market in Stockholm, so I apologize. I'm going to give some US-based examples, but I will try to explain them. The first, in the US, we have 3 public networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. Many of our local sporting events are on these public networks. So one way that Netflix could integrate sports into the US market would be to integrate public channels, live public channels directly into the interface. The second way they could do this is they could license with our sports leagues, right? So this could be in the US, the NHL, the National Football League, the National Basketball Association, Major League Baseball. In Stockholm, I went to a local soccer game, maybe your soccer Premier League. I know Sweden also has a elite hockey league. We could partner with those sports leagues and license games and integrate them directly into Netflix. The third solution could be, look, we're Netflix, we're never going to be great at sports. Let's partner with somebody who is good at sports. So Fubo TV is another streaming service. They stream live television. They tend to have a lot of the sports packages. Netflix could say, let's just partner with Fubo TV and bundle our subscriptions together. Okay, we have 3 potential solutions. We're trying to evaluate what's the best path forward. We can't build all 3 and A/B test them and figure out what's the best solution. We need a better strategy for how can we set up a good compare and contrast decision. The key is to take each of these solutions and break them down into their underlying assumptions and then rapidly test those assumptions. This is not a new idea. Eric Ries introduced it back in 2011 in the Lean Startup. The reason why we don't do this is it's hard to see our own assumptions. So I'm going to give you some strategies for how to do this. Our assumptions tend to fall into several categories. You've probably seen this Venn diagram before. It's used a lot in the product world. It turns out these categories are also the basis for the types of assumptions that we make. So we make desirability assumptions. Does anybody want our product? Another part of desirability is, are they willing to do what we need them to do to get value out of our solution? Second category, viability assumptions. We're asking, should we build it? Will it create value for our business? If we're an outcome-driven team, this is as simple as, will building the solution drive our outcome? Feasibility assumptions. What are the assumptions we're making about, is it possible? Do we have the right skills and abilities on our team? Does the technology exist? Can we create it? I'm going to add 2 more categories. The first we're pretty good at as an industry, and that's usability. Can people use it? Can they find it? Do they understand it? Are they able to do what we need them to do? The last category we're pretty terrible at, and I really hope we get better at it pretty quickly, and that's ethical assumptions. This is where I want teams looking at the data that we're collecting, how we're storing it, how we're using it, who we're selling it to. Are our customers okay with that? GDPR was a good step in the right direction in this category, but we have more room to grow. Another category we can look at in this ethical category is social inequities and inclusivity issues. Who are we choosing to serve? Who are we leaving out? For many product teams, these are implicit decisions, and we're not explicitly examining who are we serving. This could be as simple as, we're assuming our customers have a broadband connection, so we're serving our urban dwellers and we're leaving out our rural dwellers. So these 5 categories will help you generate assumptions. You can ask, what desirability assumptions are we making? What viability assumptions are we making, etc. However, it's not enough. You're still going to be blind to many of your own assumptions. So this is where I recommend using story mapping to help you generate assumptions. If you're not familiar with story mapping, it's the yellow part of this slide. With a story map, you're assuming your product already exists and you're mapping out what your customer has to do to get value from the solution. So in this case, we're assuming Netflix has already integrated local channels. So let's say NBC. In the US, the Olympics were on NBC. So let's say Netflix integrates NBC, live NBC into Netflix. I want to watch the Olympics. What do I need to do? First, I need to decide that I want to watch the Olympics, that I need to choose a streaming service. Hopefully I'm choosing Netflix. I need to open that service. In this solution, I need to know that NBC is showing the Olympics and I need to choose NBC, and then I can watch the event. The value of doing this is I can now, for each step of my story map, ask what needs to be true in order for my customer to do each step. And this is how I'm going to surface assumptions. This is what I'm doing in the gray boxes below. So in order for me to decide I want to watch the Olympics, I need to be a sports fan. I need to want to watch sports. In order for me to choose Netflix, I need to know that Netflix has sports. I need to want to watch Netflix on sports. Watch sports on Netflix, right? Maybe I have Netflix and I already have Fubo TV and I don't really want to watch sports on Netflix. I need to know that the Olympics are on NBC because in this solution, I have to choose the channel. Netflix has to be able to offer a good streaming experience. So Netflix is good at streaming movies and TV shows because they can buffer them. When we're talking about live sports, it changes. If you buffer sports too much and my buddy texts me that somebody scored a goal and I haven't seen it yet because I'm buffered and behind, that's a terrible viewing experience. right? So this starts to surface what are some of the underlying assumptions we might need to test. Now, the value of this is some of our ideas will share assumptions. Some of our ideas will have differentiating assumptions. In this particular solution, I'm making assumptions like we can partner with NBC. They can provide us the data that we need. Those assumptions are unique to this idea. The partnering with Fubo TV assumptions are going to be different. They're going to be, we can partner with Fubo TV. Our subscribers are willing to use 2 different subscription services. Those assumptions will differentiate our ideas. We can rapidly test our assumptions to get good compare and contrast data. I'm going to give you 4 strategies for how you can rapidly test your assumptions. We're going to start with this assumption our subscribers want to watch sports. The first strategy is I can prototype to simulate a specific moment. Now, I want to be clear here. We're not talking about pixel perfect production quality, full solution designs. We're not doing all of the design work before we know if this is the right solution. We're looking at the moment in the story map in which this assumption occurred, and we're simulating just that moment. So to test this solution, this assumption our subscribers want to watch sports, I'm simulating just the decision of what do you want to watch. So I could create a 1-page mock-up that just has some options, TV shows, movies, sporting events. I can upload this onto an unmoderated testing tool with the simple prompt, what do you want to watch right now? Show it to subscribers. And if some of my subscribers are sports fans, I would expect some of them to pick a sporting event some of the time. If I have access to an unmoderated testing tool, I can run this assumption test in less than 24 hours. Another way I can test this assumption is with a 1-question survey. 1-question surveys live within your product or service. You get responses while you have your customers' attention. You're not emailing them and hoping that and sending them a 15-minute survey. In this case, I can ask a single question. Have you watched a sporting event in the last week? When designing survey questions, I want you to avoid speculation and ask about specific instances in the past, just like we're doing with interviewing. So in this case, have you watched a sporting event in the last week? Yes or no. Most companies can get 1-question survey responses in a couple of hours. If you don't have a lot of traffic, it might take a day or 2. Very fast way to collect feedback on a very specific assumption. Third way we can test this assumption is we can ask, do we have data that suggests our users are already exhibiting the behavior we would expect to see if this assumption were true? So what we're doing is we're saying, if our subscribers were sports fans, what's the behavior we would expect to see? What data can we look at? We can look at behavioral analytics. We can look at support tickets. We can look at Salesforce data and opportunities and what's coming up in sales deals. We can talk to our sales teams. We can talk to our account managers. The key is we need to know what data we want to look at. So in this case, if we work at Netflix and we're saying, what behavior would we expect our subscribers to see? If they're sports fans, maybe they're already searching for sports on Netflix. Let's go look at our search queries and see if anybody is already searching for sports. Here's what I'm going to tell you. These first 3 strategies, prototyping a specific moment, 1-question surveys, and data mining around a specific assumption are going to cover the vast majority of assumptions that you come across. There is a 4th category that's going to help you with your feasibility assumption. We often use research spikes to test a feasibility assumption. A research spike is a time-boxed activity where we're giving our engineers a specific thing to research and asking them to generate data for us. Here's the key. This is not an open-ended research spike. Go figure out what it would take to implement this solution. We're giving them a very targeted assumption to research. So for example, if we're going to partner with NBC, maybe one of our assumptions is NBC can give us appropriate event data such that we can show a title and a description and an image of what's on NBC right now. And so we might tell our engineers, spend a day pulling 24 hours worth of event data from the NBC data feed and evaluate what percentage of the events have an appropriate title, description, and an image, so we can start to evaluate how much data massaging do we have to do to get this feed to work in our interface. It's very targeted. and you're asking them to collect data about a very specific assumption, this does two things. It's going to help us collect, compare, and contrast data so we know which solution is going to be easier to build. And by the time we get to delivery and we need to estimate, it's going to help us provide better estimates. Okay, we just covered a lot of ground, so I'm going to do a quick recap. We started at the top by talking about defining outcomes. We're shifting from an output focus to an outcome focus so we can be more adaptable and more resilient in times of change. The first weekly activity the product trio is doing on a weekly basis to drive that outcome is we're interviewing to discover opportunities. Opportunities represent customer needs, pain points, and desires. It's how we're going to create customer value. We're then taking our solutions and we're breaking them down into their underlying assumptions. And we're using rapid assumption testing to compare and contrast our solutions, to evaluate the outputs we might build to create customer value by delivering on our opportunities, and to create business value by driving our outcomes. Now, I know we just covered a lot of ground. I will share this framework, and lots of how-to on how to do each of these steps is included in my book. The book is called Continuous Discovery Habits. It's available around the world on Amazon and other book retailers in both paperback and Kindle or EPUB format. There will be an Audible version eventually, but I don't have a timeline on that yet. I apologize. I know many people are waiting for that. This book was designed to be a practical, hands-on guide for product trios to learn how to interview well, to learn how to run good assumption tests, to learn how to use opportunity solution trees to make sure you're aligning customer value and business value. All right, I see that there are a ton of questions in the Q&A. I think we're ready to turn to questions.
Thank you so much, Teresa. That was really interesting. It sounds so easy when you say it like that. Just do it, right? So you have 6 questions so far, and if there's anyone with more questions, just add them in the Q&A function in Zoom. You find it in the bottom of the screen. You can just add away. Teresa, do you want to look yourself, or you want me to read them, or?
Yeah, if you could read them, that would be.
Yeah, sure. Phenomenal. We have one from an anonymous person. When getting feedback from customers, do you think it's equally important to ask existing customers as well as potential new customers?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So when I use the term customer, I mean it broadly to represent anybody who matches your target customer profile. So that could be a current customer, that could be a prospect, that could be somebody in your addressable market that's never even heard of you. Obviously, the easiest people to talk to are your current customers, and then maybe next your prospects. It's a little bit harder to reach people that have never heard of you. But as your interviewing practice matures, you want to make sure you're recruiting for variation and that you're reaching into those further away populations.
Makes sense. Next question is, where do you see the role of the data analyst, since it's not included in the trio? From Sophie Rigoulet.
Yeah, so the trio idea really comes from what are the most common roles represented at companies across the industry. And right now, today, that's product managers, designers, and engineers. A lot of companies are investing in data analysts, just like a lot of companies are investing in user researchers. And if you have the luxury of having those folks on your team full-time, like they're not shared resources, and you work on the type of product where it'd be beneficial to have them involved in most discovery decisions, your trio can become a quad. That's fine. That's part of this idea of this concept can flex. But you have to understand the more people involved, the slower your decision making. So that what you want to ask is, do you need that data analyst in every decision, or do you just need to invite them in some decisions? That's a judgment call. And I can't make it for you. It's going to depend on your product. It's going to depend on the individual data analyst on your team, right? So this is not a rigid concept. It can flex based on your organizational context.
Can I jump in with a follow-up question there? Because you mentioned there, if you had a dedicated data analyst to your team, not a shared resource, is it a problem if it's a shared resource, or?
Yeah, so if it's a shared resource, you don't want them in every decision because it's going to slow you down, right? They're not going to be available full time. Like you're making decisions all day, every day. That doesn't mean you don't want to consult them when you're making decisions that are critical to their domain, that are critical to their expertise, right? So our primary goal How do we get the roles in the room represented that we need for the given decision that we're trying to make?
Okay. Then we have a question from Danway. What are your thoughts regarding the customer the trio meets every week? Does it make difference if it's the same customer or a different one every week? I know it's a leading question.
Well, so in an ideal world, you're talking to a different customer every week, right? Because our goal with interviewing is to uncover the variation in the opportunity space, right? So the more diversity in our interview pool, the more of that experience we're going to uncover. However, there are benefits to interviewing the same customer over time. We start to learn we learn more about that customer's context. We learn more about how their needs shift over time. So I like to see teams mix and match. I want you talking to a wide variety of customers, but you can also have a handful of customers that you revisit regularly. Again, you need to make sure there's variation in that handful of customers, so you're not designing for a small subset of the market. When you're first getting started with this, I want you to talk to the easiest customers you can find, right? As your practice matures, I want you thinking about variation in who you're talking to.
Cool. Then we have a question here. How would you balance the importance between quantitative data compared with qualitative analysis?
Yeah, so the reality is we need both. So what's fantastic is we now live in a world where we can instrument our products and we have floods of user behavioral analytics, which is phenomenal. Here's what we don't get from behavioral analytics. Behavioral analytics are great for optimizing existing workflows, for understanding what customers are doing with your current product. They're not going to help you uncover new opportunities. They're not going to help you uncover new use cases. They're not going to help you uncover the why behind your customers are doing those things, right? Now, behavioral analytics are important because I can interview you about your customer behavior. And again, because of these cognitive biases, your perception of your behavior may not match your reality, and your behavioral analytics are your reality, right? So we want to infuse both of these data streams. It's not about one is better than the other. It's really about we want to pull from both so we get a more complete picture of what our customer's world looks like.
Thank you. Then we have a question from Danway again. What are your thoughts about documenting these collective stories from weekly customer meetings for the purpose of turning them into insights and knowledge sharing?
Yeah, so in the book, I explain several different ways to capture what you're learning in a way that helps you synthesize what you're learning. So here's what I'm trying to avoid. I don't want you to do one set of activities to do the work and then a second set of activities to document the work. Because what happens when we separate those two things? We don't document the work, right? So in the book, I introduce a number of strategies for how to visually synthesize what you're learning. That's going to help you stay aligned as a trio. There's a side benefit if it's also going to document what you're learning as you go. So for interviews in particular, one of the documents I recommend creating for each interview, it's called an interview snapshot. It's a one-page template that helps you synthesize what you heard in each interview. So you're creating the interview snapshot to synthesize what you're learning. So it's helping you do the work. And the side effect is you're also documenting the work. There's a number of other visual tools in the book: experience maps, interview snapshots, opportunity solution trees, story maps, assumption maps. All of these are helping you do the work, and they have the side benefit of they're also helping you document the work.
Thanks. Then I have a question. I feel there's a constant struggle on how much engineering should be involved in discovery. Often teams feel they get the assignments out of context, and the job is to solve that assignment as fast as possible. How do you find that balance of involvement from engineers?
Yeah, so a lot of companies still have an IT mindset where we think about engineers as a cost center. We want to just tell them what to build, and we want to maximize their time spent writing code because we believe their value is the code that they produce. That's a very short-sighted view of the world, and here's why. Marty Kagan says that if your engineers are only writing code, you're only getting 50% of their value. I actually think that's tremendously optimistic. I think if your engineers are only writing code, you're maybe getting 10% of their value. Your engineers will generate better solution ideas. They will help you find better ideas of what to build because they have a deeper knowledge of what's possible with technology. So yes, it is possible that if they spend 100% of their time writing code, you will get more code output from them, but you will very likely build the wrong things. So when we move them earlier in the process, we borrow some of their coding time to do discovery. We take a little bit of a hit on the delivery side. And actually, I don't think we take any hit, but let's say hypothetically, we take a little bit of a hit on the delivery side. We gain it all back by building the right thing. And the reason why I say I don't think we take a hit on the delivery side is remember all those handoffs and all that rework we had to do because our engineers don't have the context. Anytime we saved by having them just write code, we lost it with all of that rework. So it is counterintuitive, especially if you're steeped in this IT mindset. You will build better solutions faster if you pull your engineers to be part of the discovery process.
Excellent. Then we have a question from Heleno Alves. Do you think that using some metrics as lead time and throughput could help you improve the process of continuous discovery habits?
Yeah, this is a really good question. There's a couple of metrics I like to look at. So if I'm an outcome-driven team, my primary job is to drive that outcome. So the success of my discovery work should be measured by what impact am I having on that outcome. However, that's a lagging indicator, right? It takes time to drive outcomes. It takes time to learn what will impact that outcome. You're going to have some quarters where you don't hit your outcome, and it's not because you're not doing good discovery. It's just because there's a lot of chance and luck and circumstance in the work that we're doing. So the metrics that I like to look at to evaluate the health of a team's discovery practice, the first is the cycle time between customer touchpoints. So some teams make the mistake of they say, we need to interview on a weekly basis. Let's talk to 12 customers in a quarter. That's our goal. The problem with that goal is you could talk to all 12 customers in the last week. You just gamed your metric. You're not actually doing continuous cadence. You're just gaming the metric. So the metric I like to look at is reduce the time between customer touchpoints. So if you're interviewing on a weekly basis, that should be 1 week between customer touchpoints, right? So if you're at monthly, you're at 30 days. Try to get to 7 days. So that's the first metric. The second metric is to look at the cycle time for running an assumption test. So you have an assumption you're trying to test. How long does it take to collect data on that assumption? When you're first getting started, your cycle time might be long because you're implementing things like one-question surveys, or you're implementing things like bringing on unmoderated testing tools and learning how they work. That's fine if it's a one-time learning task. If it's taking 3 weeks to run every single assumption test, we have a problem. So I like to think about how do we increase the continuous cadence. So I like those two metrics of reducing cycle time between customer interviews and then cycle time to collect data on an assumption test.
I actually have a follow-up question. You know about the book Accelerate. They have tons of metrics that are kind of not exactly what you say. There's some other, they have cycle time, but I think maybe not exactly the same definition as you have there. What's your opinion? Have you read that book, and what's your opinion of the suggestions they have?
I'm familiar with the book, but I have not read it yet. If you can remember specific things they suggested, I'm happy to comment on them.
It's let's not go there now, but I
okay. The other thing that I will share.
Go ahead.
The other metric you could look at is if you're doing good discovery, you should be throwing ideas away. If you're never throwing ideas away, you're falling prey to confirmation bias. So that's another thing to look at, is how often are we abandoning ideas?
Do you have any of those suggestions in your book? What metrics to kind of health metrics for a team?
I don't have those in the book, but I do have a blog post about them, which is, I think it's called something like how to measure discovery effectively or something like that. So you can find that on producttalk.org.
Thanks. Then we have another question. What product thinkers inspire you? What books would you read, and who should one follow on products, Twitter?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So we have some pretty amazing folks working in product right now. I think for basic product fundamentals, I recommend Melissa Perry's book, Escaping the Build Trap. Her work is phenomenal. That's a really well-written, well-thought-out book. Marty Kagan's books obviously are he's like the missionary in our industry, right? Like he's pouring the Kool-Aid, getting everybody to kind of sing the same tune. And both of his books, Inspired and Empowered, are phenomenal at doing that. I really like to go broader than just the product world. So one of the books that really inspires me is Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath. That book summarizes what we know about decision making. And when we're talking about discovery, it's all about decisions about what to build. So that's one of my go-tos. Petra Willa, based out of Hamburg, Germany, has a book out called Strong Product People. It's a book for product leaders about how to develop individual product people. It's phenomenal. It's a very practical, hands-on guide. I'm sure I'm forgetting many good ones, but you can't go wrong starting there.
Excellent. Time is up. Do you have, I think we have 3 more questions. Do you have time for those, or do you need to?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Let's go to the next one then. Then we have, if a lot of teams within the company takes on the approach of doing weekly research, how would you go about that? Could the interviews be a joint effort between teams, and should it be driven by each team, resulting in multiple interviews? That can be, I guess, could be a congestion with the customers maybe.
Yeah, so I want to see each team conducting their own interview, because what they're trying to learn each week is going to be different. So let me stick with my Netflix example. Every single team at Netflix might start an interview with a question like, tell me about the last time you watched Netflix. But the parts of the story they're going to drill into are going to be different based on what they're working on, right? So if I work on the search team, first of all, I might not even ask that question. I might ask, tell me about the last time you searched for something on Netflix. So the scope of the story that I collect might be different from somebody else, right? But even if I'm asking the same question, I might, if I'm focused on recommendations or helping you evaluate if a show's good or not, I'm going to drill into that part of the story. Whereas if I'm working on the playback experience, I'm going to drill into that part of the story. So an interview is really context dependent for the team. So I do want to see every team interviewing every week. Also, when we do our own research, it's more actionable, it's more believable. This is why we want the team that's building the product doing their own research. Now, some people get concerned. What if I have 20 teams? Are they all going to be reaching out to the same customers? This is the key to automating your recruiting process. Those automating tactics, your customers are opting in. You're not reaching out to them. So if they want to opt in to 7 interviews in a month, that's their choice. If they've already done an interview and they're overwhelmed, they don't have to opt in. Also, a lot of those strategies, like when you put the ask in your product, a lot of the tools that help you do that allow you to target. And so if somebody's already done an interview, you can not show them the ask. So by automating your recruiting process, it really helps this idea of how do we make sure we're not overwhelming our customers.
Great advice. Next question from Danway. What is your advice to the trio regarding when it's time to make a decision to avoid changing direction every week, or never making a decision because they keep learning all the time?
Yeah, so this is where I think your delivery cadence influences your discovery cadence. We're not trying to prove what's the one best next thing to build. We're never going to have certainty in our business. Everything we put in our backlog is a bet. Discovery helps us make better bets. It's that simple, right? And so when we think about, there's 2 different ways things end up in our backlog. Sometimes engineers are just ready for the next thing and we have to make the best bet we can, right? And that's just, hopefully we've done some discovery and it's a better bet than if we'd done no discovery. Other times we find a clear front runner from our assumption testing and we push that to delivery. But there's this back and forth cadence between the 2, where sometimes your delivery is going to pull from discovery, sometimes discovery is going to push to delivery. It's always going to be a judgment call. We are not removing ambiguity and uncertainty from this process. We're just making better bets.
It's little of the old saying, perfect is the enemy of
exactly,
good.
Exactly. And discovery continues into delivery, right? Even after you build something, you still have to measure impact and learn, did it work, and iterate and improve it. So it's not like you get one chance, it goes into the delivery pipeline and you're done. We do need to keep learning and we need to keep iterating and we need to keep improving.
Thanks. Question from Mark. How can continuous discovery habits help you be successful in working with OKRs?
Yeah, so OKRs are just a way to format an outcome, right? So OKR is a qualitative objective with a set of quantitative key results. Usually your key results are going to map to the outcome at the top of your opportunity solution tree. So I will say that a lot of the teams that I work with use OKRs. They're running one opportunity solution tree that really reflects the objective. They're measuring it based on the key results.
A follow-up question on that. OKRs are typically on a quarterly basis. And if you do continuous discovery, I imagine that you could change direction a bit faster than on a quarterly basis. Could you end up in a situation where you had the assumption that you wanted to do this outcome this quarter, you realize that during the kind of term events, it's better to take another outcome because you won't have impact on the one you thought you would have impact on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, your outcome will evolve even within a quarter. However, it shouldn't radically change. I'm going to argue it shouldn't radically change even quarter to quarter, right? We want to set up outcomes to be evergreen. So if we stick with our Netflix example, Netflix is probably always going to have a team focused on viewing engagement. Always. That outcome is not going to change. Now, the focus quarter to quarter on how we might drive viewing engagement might change quarter to quarter, right? But conceptually, the outcome is the same. The opportunity space is the same. And we're just working on different parts of our tree. There will be times, and especially early in the life, like if you work at a startup, your outcome might change radically because you don't even know what product you're building yet. But your value to the customer should be like your value proposition. Once you've verified that you do have a domain in which you can create value, your outcome might evolve. But again, because conceptually, you're trying to set it in a way that it's stable over time.
Great, thanks. Then I have a question I've actually come across many times in my career. Any tips for engineering leaders on how to influence product organizations to move into outcome mindset?
Yeah, the first thing I would recommend is instrument your product. Make sure that you're collecting analytics to understand impact. Once you've done that with every single release, sit down with your stakeholders and ask them, what impact do you expect this release to have? And then, because you've instrumented your product, do a retrospective after a period of time. So I would go to a stakeholder and I'd say, what impact do you expect this to have and on what time period? Then after that time period is passed, evaluate the results. Inevitably, there will be a gap between what you expected to happen and what actually happened. This will help you start shifting more to focusing on the outcomes instead of the outputs. It's also going to help you start focusing on how do we make better discovery decisions, because the ones we're making right now are clearly falling short.
Excellent. Okay, that was the final question. And unless there's anything else, I would like to really thank you, Teresa, for this amazing talk. And definitely your book is on top of my reading list after this. I'm really curious to see all the details in the book. Yeah, so thank you very much for this talk.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I do recommend picking up the book. And the other thing that I will share is that I know it's not enough to read a book, that applying what you're reading is often the hard part. So if you go to producttalk.org, we have a number of opportunities to get help with how to apply the book. So we have a membership community where you can connect with like-minded peers who are also trying to put the habits into practice. We have a number of online courses that can help you build skill in some of the different habits. So my company, Product Talk, is really working hard to help teams adopt the habits. So if you need help as you read the book, please check out some of those resources.
Awesome. This talk will also be on YouTube in a few days, so it will be available there. So, but thank you very much, and have a great day for you and evening for us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, bye everyone.